Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to uncover the stolen history behind one of America's most misunderstood celebrations. I mean, every single year, millions of Americans throw on sombreros, grab a margarita, and join in what is honestly a massive display of cultural appropriation. But here's the thing. The real story of Cinco de Mayo? It's actually this incredible hidden tale of binational solidarity, wartime grit, and a corporate hijacking that was so seamless, well, most of us don't even realize it happened. Okay, so let's dive right in and challenge what you probably think you know about this massive annual party. If you were to walk into literally any local bar on May 5th and just ask the crowd what exactly they're raising their glasses to, the overwhelming majority would confidently tell you, oh, it's Mexico's Independence Day. But is it? Have you ever wondered why we celebrate this day with such crazy enthusiasm here in the United States, while just south of the border in Mexico, it's barely recognized outside of one specific region? Well, that brings us to our biggest misconception right out of the gate. May 5th is absolutely not Mexico's Independence Day. Not even close. Mexican independence is actually celebrated on September 16th. Cinco de Mayo, on the other hand, commemorates a single, very specific military victory, the Battle of Puebla. And yet, over the last century or so, the true, profound meaning of this date has been almost completely wiped from our public consciousness. So instead of honoring actual history, modern participants have fully embraced this highly commercialized illusion. There's a fascinating exploratory research study out of Harvard University by Jose Higuera, where he interviewed people across different generations in Los Angeles to figure out how this happened. One 32-year-old participant hit the nail on the head, talking about how people just use the holiday as an excuse to get drunk, literally calling it Cinco de Drinko. It's kind of wild. The richness of an actual historical triumph has just been watered down to a superficial drinking day, totally painted over with stereotypical caricatures. Part 1, The True Battle of Puebla, a Stolen History. To find out exactly who stole the true meaning of the holiday, we first need to look at its really surprising origins. Because the actual history paints this beautiful picture of profound binational solidarity. So let's set the scene. In 1858, Mexico was completely devastated by the War of Reform, which essentially bankrupted its national treasury. Because of that debt, the French decided to invade. On May 5, 1862, this highly arrogant French military force expected to just casually stroll in and take the city of Puebla. But instead, Mexican General Ignacio Zaragoza and his troops engaged them in fierce, brutal, hand-to-hand combat, stopping the French dead in their tracks. By May 27th, a Spanish-language newspaper called La Voz de México published the triumphant news in the United States. And that timing, it's absolutely crucial, because the American Civil War was raging right at that exact same time. So here is the really crazy part. This tradition was actually born in the United States. You see, the borders had just recently shifted after the Mexican-American War, which meant thousands of Mexicans suddenly found themselves living in the U.S., especially in places like California, Nevada, and Oregon. When the news of the victory at Puebla reached the gold rush towns of California, those Mexican Americans just erupted in spontaneous celebration. Actually, scratch the idea that this was a party exported from Mexico. It was a totally organic, American-born tradition started by Latinos in the Southwest. But you might be wondering, why did it catch on so fast? Well, the victory at Puebla was celebrated up north because it indirectly supported the Union Army's fight for democracy against the Confederacy. The French forces invading Mexico heavily sympathized with the Confederate South. So by stopping the French at Puebla, General Zaragoza essentially threw a massive wrench into potential European support for the Confederacy. For Mexican Americans who supported the Union, this was a huge morale boost. It was this incredible moment of deep, binational solidarity, literally two republics fighting for freedom and democracy at the exact same time. Part 2. Corporate hijacking. Selling stereotypes. If the original meaning was so profound, how on earth did we end up with the cheesy fiesta stereotype we see today? Well, the answer comes down to one word: commodification. It's the exact mechanism used to slowly erase historical memory in favor of massive profits. Commodification essentially strips away all the complex human and historical elements of a culture, and then repackages the most basic, easily digestible stereotypes into something that can be sold. And honestly, for Cinco de Mayo, this process was executed masterfully over the course of several decades. Here is exactly how that commodification played out. Originally, these celebrations were organized by local community groups called Juntas Patrióticas. But after the U.S. Civil War and the French intervention ended, those community groups just kind of lost the resources and funding to keep the celebrations going. That left a massive vacuum. So step 2, Local non-Latino merchants stepped in to keep the party alive, mostly because it sold products. Like in the 1920s, furniture stores would actually use the day to sell early California decor. By step 3, rolling into the late 20th century, megacorporations realized the drawing power of the day, transforming these local street fairs into massively sponsored corporate events. These corporate culprits completely successfully replaced the real historical narrative with easily recognizable stereotypes just to sell products. The new storytellers of Cinco de Mayo, they aren't historians, and they definitely aren't grandmothers. They're alcohol brands pushing beer, retail giants setting up grocery end caps loaded with chips and salsa, uninformed morning news anchors shouting "Ole" on TV, and social media influencers chasing that fiesta virality. They took a genuine zone of cultural exchange and morphed it into a mind-boggling $1.5 trillion consumer spending opportunity. Part 3. Complicity of silence, an empty stage. Now, corporations couldn't have pulled off this narrative heist completely on their own. They needed an empty stage to perform on. The commercialization is so incredibly powerful today that it actually seeps into our educational institutions. For instance, in that Harvard study, one 31-year-old participant recalled how their middle school celebrated the day by literally handing out non-alcoholic slushy margaritas to the kids. I mean, instead of teaching students about the geopolitical impacts of the Battle of Puebla on the American Civil War, schools are reducing history to artificial drink flavors and papier-mâché piñatas. So you have to ask, where is the pushback from the Mexican-American community? Interestingly enough, in response to all this stereotyping, many older Mexican Americans just opt out of celebrating entirely. One participant mentioned that their grandparents taught them to strictly honor Mexican Independence Day in September and to actively ignore Cinco de Mayo just because of how wildly commercialized it's become. But this creates a really tough paradox. By opting out of the conversation to avoid the stereotypes, they unintentionally leave the corporations as the absolute only voices in the room dictating the narrative. And the data on Spanish language retention brilliantly illustrates this. It shows exactly how the defense against cultural appropriation weakens over time. Retention drops from 85% in the first generation, down to 71% in the second, and then plummets to just 49% by the third generation. As assimilation naturally happens and generational fading sets in, younger Mexican Americans get further and further distanced from the authentic oral histories of their ancestors. So when they look around for their cultural heritage on May 5th, the only thing they see is the loud, incredibly well-funded corporate version. Part 4. Reclaiming true history, unsilencing the past. Now that we know exactly how the history was silenced, we need to talk about how we can take it back. Everything in this explainer draws directly from academic research, specifically Jose Higuera's thesis from Harvard University, to expose that massive gap between authentic culture and corporate marketing. And the research makes a great point. Just getting mad at the commercialization isn't enough. We have to actively re-inject the true history back into the public consciousness. We need to treat Cinco de Mayo as a true contact zone, a space for mutually beneficial cultural exchange, rather than just some superficial costume party. We must reclaim this contact zone by elevating the real story of binational solidarity. It means we have to shift the focus away from those grocery store end caps and instead fly both the U.S. and Mexican flags side by side, exactly like the original California-based Mexican-American communities did back in the 1860s. It's a perfect opportunity to teach younger generations that the United States and Mexico are so much more than just bordering neighbors. Our histories of fighting for freedom and democracy are deeply and inextricably intertwined. So, knowing the truth behind the illusion, it really is up to you to decide how you participate moving forward. The great heist of Cinco de Mayo only works if we keep buying into their fabricated narrative. Let me leave you with this thought. Next May 5th, will you just buy into the corporate party, or will you raise a glass to honor a shared, genuinely triumphant legacy of freedom?